This week, the moon is full once again, and this time it's in the fixed sign of Taurus. So, food, infrastructure, safety, security, the land, money, our bodies are just a few things we'll be collectively facing as the dark is illuminated for us to see. And in that illumination of the dark, we are also having to face our dead and the dead overall, as today, November 2nd, is the Day of the Dead, or also All Souls Day, a time where we remember those who came before us. So this is all about love in one way or another, as Venus is also the ruler of this full moon, and she herself's in a conversation with Chiron, Jupiter, and Pluto this week, expanding and also having us face the ways we engage with love as a practice with ourselves, in our relationships, and collectively. All right, y'all, this is the weekly forecast from November 2nd through the 8th, the full moon in Taurus, all about love. So let's get into it. So welcome back to Yapping with the Stars, the show where I talk about life and spirit with the help of the planets, stars, and zodiacs, and a little bit of common sense thrown in there as well. I am your host and guide, Nicole Rouse, a storyteller who comes from a line of storytellers who weave and tell stories in many different ways. And here I work with astrology and ethnography to explore the stories of what it means for us to be human. Because right now the present is up for grabs. So who is leading the stories that will bring us into our futures? Now, every Sunday, we check into the chaos we call society and ask two questions. What's the cosmos showing us this week? And what are we being called to move, create, burn, build, and or reflect upon, y'all? And we're still in a lot of reflection. Full moons bring reflections. And that's something that, I want to kind of highlight this week is that we are entering into a time in which the moon will be full. We are being asked to see through the dark in some way, shape, or form. And we're being asked to see through the dark in the most fixed areas of our charts and in society: Taurus, Earth, wet. It is a fixed sign that helps us move from the beginnings of spring, Aries, to stabilize the things that we are trying to plant, so that as we move into Gemini season and transition then into what will be in the Northern Hemisphere the summertime, Taurus reminds us of the materiality of our existence, right? And so that is where we can get fixed. It's the foundations, it's what makes us stable. But we're realizing that we're not stable. Taurus is safety and security. It is the kind of comforts of life. But we're being asked to ask ourselves, is this shit safe or secure? Are we comfortable? So the foundations of us, of ourselves collectively, individually, as kind of collectives that have to engage with other collectives, our foundations are being shaken. They are being kind of having us review them. The illumination, again, of things we maybe did not want to look at, did not want to examine, did not want to see, are being resurrected into the light. And then we are being asked then, what is a foundation that is sustainable to build upon? So we're going to talk about all this week as we get into the various transits, because the full moon is not the only thing going on. Now, if you've been interested in learning more about astrology, y'all, if you are, is this piqued your interest in the ways that, we can engage with what's going on in the stars, in the sky, to help us make sense of what is happening on the ground, that I am actually teaching a series of Astrology 100s through Big Liz Conjure this month, starting next week, next Wednesday. So it'll be Astrology 100, 101, and 102. So next week is 100. And before we even get into the kind of what the planets are, what the houses are, what the signs are, you can just look at your chart, and by the way that planets are grouped, the different hemispheres, the kind of formations of what you are seeing can tell you a lot. So in Astrology 100, I'm going to work with folks if you have no astrology background whatsoever, or even if you do, but you want to get a refresher and really understand where your foundations are, then you can join me starting next week with Astrology 100. And then from there in 101 and 102, I'll go into the signs and the planets, and then from there, the houses. So if you have been a part of my Patreon and at the soundscape level and higher, this is what we've been going over since February, slowly really getting into and diving diving into what the astrology chart is, why it matters, and how we can engage with it in different levels. And so this is really me offering then those kind of foundational things that I've been working with the Patreon at the soundscape level at to a larger audience in a kind of more condensed fashion. So if you've been interested in learning astrology from a Black queer lens and want to get that foundation, please check that out. And also, as part of that, my astrology books are open, but they are a bit limited this month and next. So if you are interested in having a one-on-one reading with me, go ahead and check out my website. Again, spaces are limited, but my books are open for the winter season, and I will be running a special. So check that. So check back to the website later this week for what my winter special will be for folks interested in getting a reading with me. All right. And finally, the last thing I want to highlight, y'all, is that, and kind of going off on this themes that we're seeing this week with Taurus, and we still got Jupiter in the mix. If you were with me last week, I talked about how Jupiter was pretty loud in Cancer. So we really are having these deep conversations, both with ourselves, but most likely with one another, and also in society around family and care and nurturing and what it means to nurture ourselves and one another in these kind of enclaves and these kind of units we call family and society. We're continuing this conversation this week because now Venus is loud, since Venus is the ruler of this full moon in Taurus, and she herself is in the sign that she likes to be in, Libra, before she makes her way to Scorpio, a sign that she's called to be at fall in or in detriment in, but really to whose detriment and why. We're really talking now about this idea of what it means to kind of bend, to queer, to think differently about our relationships, about the ways that we form relationships, how we commune with one another. And this is really the theme of the next Queering Chaos conversation that I'll be having in Chicago, November 18th. So last month we talked about queering spirit and spirituality, and that was really timely because of the ways that we were in October, Hoodoo Heritage Month. Today is the Day of the Dead, All Saints Day, and so, or All Souls Day, excuse me. So, because All Saints Day was yesterday. So today we are being asked to honor who we come from, where we come from, and why, to honor our dead. But how do we honor the dead when we don't know how to honor life? Because the two are in a conversation, two are in a kind of symbiotic relationship that has been kind of made to not be in balance. And so we have to start to take back what was stolen. And what was stolen again was the idea of the human, was the idea of how we become human, how we embody our humanity. And then in that embodiment, how we treat one another. Because to be human means that we need one another, whether we like it or not. This is where the foundations of love come in as a kind of natural guiding principle of the universal law that we really are still grappling with, because I don't think we do know what love is. Many times we're taught love in these sacrificial, sacrificing ways that always require us to martyr ourselves in one way or another, especially when we occupy a body whose identities put upon these bodies have then marginalized us into these roles of servitude. What does it mean to take that back? And this is a whole point of kind of queering conversations overall in the project that I created and that my co-producer Forrest is helping me with, is really how do we queer, how do we bend, how do we essentially break these normative understandings of what it means to be human? Well, we have to take that back. And so we're going to take back the concept of the family and community in this next Queering Chaos conversation, November 18th, in which we're going to be at Dorothy downstairs with three amazing community gatherers in the city. Dr. Moya Bailey, who is a professor at Northwestern, but also somebody who has been organizing for the past 20 plus years. And part of that organizing really is gathering people together. So having her at the table with Kristen Kaza, who is lovingly known as Chicago's Party Mom, who was one of the founders of the queer party collective Slow Mo, and herself now has two children and a wife, and working and really kind of thinking about and engaging with what does it mean to bring family into kind of this idea of partying, but party does not necessarily having to be, you know, this kind of nighttime only thing, but how do we take the party scene and gather folks together communally? So she's going to be talking with us alongside Roy Kingsley, who is a librarian and rapper and the founder of Rapberry. He has his 11th album out. That's a beautiful album, Dandelions, that I'm looking forward to talking with him personally about in the future. But he'll be coming in as a Black queer librarian who is a well-known rapper who brings those two together in his work with Rapberry, which is a mobile kind of sonic archival library that reminds us of the power of word, of spoken word, of the lyricism of music itself as a kind of binocular of not just community stories, but also community gatherings. So we're going to bring them around the table with Forrest and I, literally at a kitchen table, and having a conversation, bringing down also the queer mothers to sit with us in the audience to talk about what does it mean to create family, especially in these times that we have these holiday seasons, right? We have Thanksgiving in the United States, and we got Christmas coming up, and it's all about the family, right? And we are fed these images of families coming together and putting aside your differences to sit around a table and, break bread and hopefully eat non-dry turkey, right? While people ignore the kind of rumblings going on, whether we like each other or not, because we have to perform this idea of family. Well, if many of us realize, especially those of us who are Pluto and Libra generation, right? So this is going to be very young Gen X, older millennials. There's this kind of in between generation in which we're really having to face the reality that those images of relationships that we've been fed, especially about family, have been bullshit, right? They've not allowed us to actually express our sense of selves, to come into a sense of self, to even know who the hell we are. That's why I believe so many of us have quote unquote come out later in life in one way, shape, or form, whether it be coming out as queer or just coming out as tired of some bullshit and not wanting to live the kind of script in life that we are told, right? There is this kind of taking back and really queering our sense of what does it mean for us to gather together, who we call family, who we call kin, who we call friend, shit, who we even call lover, how we've been taught a marriage should be, how we've been taught a friendship should be. Do those actually get us the so-called benefit of those relationships, or do we still feel as if we can never fully express ourselves? Because if we do, then we're afraid that those people who we built a life with and around won't be there. What the full moon in Taurus is going to be illuminating for us is that the shit that needs to break has to break now because it's been breaking us. Right. So this idea of relationships, this idea of love, this idea of safety and security and trust is really being illuminated right now. And not just part of the project, but overall, right? That we are all having to face the concept of who do we commune with and why? Because if we cannot trust the state, if we know the state does not have our back, if we are seeing full force how they have been feeding us, the commercialization of the family, and how the holiday season is upon us right now. So we're going to be seeing the ways that these kind of understandings of family and putting things aside and just, breaking bread with those across the divide because they're family. We're going to see this invoked heavily because it's also tied to the consumer-based model of these economic systems that needs us to consume things at this time as well and call that love. We are now going to be faced with a choice. Do we continue to buy into this consumeristic understanding of love that does not give us any foundation at the same time that the state literally refuses to feed us? At the same time in which the state is using food and access to food and food prices, money, in order to control a population, to exert its authoritarian control over all of us so that it can get its friends, the state can get its friends to keep its tax benefits at the expense of us. Right? The full moon in Taurus right now is really revealing and illuminating to us all the realities of what it means to believe somebody else's understanding of safety and security because you have been disembodied from the body that is telling you that none of this shit is safe or secure. It's been on a fault line for a long time, and now we cannot ignore it. All right. So let's get into it, y'all. So this is really the energy of this week. And we're starting off this week with some tensions in the air because Venus again is ruling this full moon. Venus rules Taurus and it rules Libra. And with this full moon in Taurus, I want you to think about 6 months ago. So end of April, that was the new moon in Taurus. What was planted then? What were you planting? What were you doing? Especially looking at the house that Taurus rules for you, that'll give you the area of life that may have been highlighted. So it's Scorpio rising. I'm a Scorpio rising. Taurus rules my seventh house of one-on-one relationships. That's going to rule one-on-one contracts, right? Business, romantic, platonic, and the like. And so if you think about 6 months ago, I would think about the relationships that I was in, getting in, starting to plant seeds around, and then thinking 6 months later here, what has kind of been illuminated in that area for me. So that's how you can work with the kind of transits. And not, again, every transit will hit you personally. That's why those little numbers on the chart matter, because that'll tell you if the transits that are happening right now will impact your personal planets. And this full moon in Taurus is going to be, I believe, around 13 degrees. So if you have any fixed planets, fixed planets, planets in fixed place signs. Damn. If you have any planets in fixed place signs, that's going to be Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius between, say, 11 and 15, 16 degrees. You're going to feel this, quote unquote, more than those who may not have those placements. And I've got a moon at 17 degrees in Taurus. So there's ways that this moon is illuminating some things in my first and seventh house of one-on-one relationships and self. So that's how you can work with the charts and the transits individually, y'all. But right now, today, we are seeing Venus kind of open up this full moon energy because she is opposite Chiron in Aries. Remember, Chiron is the wounded healer. We talked about this last week because Jupiter is part of this conversation, because both Venus and Chiron are squaring Jupiter in Cancer. So this is a T square. And this T square is exact today at 24 degrees. Okay, now a lot of astrologers talk about when Venus and Jupiter are in a conversation, even if it's a harsh one. So a harsh one's going to be, or a more tense one is going to be a square in opposition. It still has a benefit to it because these are two benefics. And I don't just necessarily disagree with that, but then we got to put that in context, y'all. We always got to put things in context. Theoretically, yes, but then we got to look at society. It's on fucking fire. So then what does this mean for us when even in a square, the two benefics are supposed to bring us benefit? Well, it's still in a conversation with Chiron. So there is some healing and we're having to do around wounding that has us have to think about the ways that we understand our understandings of relationships with the self and how our understandings of those come through the family. So Jupiter in Cancer right now, again, is expanding a lot of things around Cancerian themes, as I've been saying for a while. So the home, the family, what home is, our roots, where we come from. Cancer is also locations of our dead, the shallow shores, sacred and mundane coming up, coming together. Jupiter being the planet of expansion, but also the planet of philosophy, of religion, of spirituality and spiritual gurus, right? Pluto in Aquarius is bringing up the collective dead. Jupiter in Cancer is ensuring that you have to face your dead. Okay, it's just going to expand it. We're having to face where we come from, both in our families, but also as a society. When a society refuses to look at its past, when it refuses to look at its own ghosts, that does not mean the ghosts are not going to be there. So the ghosts have resurrected. The ghosts have come up from the dead. Can we face the past collectively? In the United States, we're seeing no. What they're doing is doubling down in their mythology making and their understanding of the state, and being this space of, these white men who are coming here for freedom. And if you disparage or you bring another historical story into the mix, you are seen as a traitor, right? We are now seeing the ways that authoritarian rule is ensuring that it has a ruling over the culture, over the kind of history, the stories, the mythologies, the mythos. This is all Venus themes, y'all. Venus rules culture, right? The rise of the cultural worker, what I've been talking about with Neptune going into Aries, but now it's back into Pisces right now with Saturn. We are in all retrograde. We are seeing the state, we are seeing power trying to bring us back down into its illusions, into its stories, into its understanding and construction of where we come from. But there is a pushback, right? There is a tension because we are realizing that that story, that myth making, those constructions don't actually align with our lived experiences, our realities. The body is coming alive. This is Taurus, right? The body has been coming alive. Uranus has been hanging out in Taurus for 7 years. Now, Uranus has moved into Gemini. But this week, along with the full moon, we also see Uranus, because it's retrograde, moving back into Taurus. We are getting a review. We are going to have to feel the reality of our foundations, feel the reality, right, of what safety and security truly is right now. Because once we believe our reality, that is when we can actually do something different. Because now we have faced what is going on, and in that facing of what truly is versus sitting in the illusions of what somebody wants you to believe, right? When you are sitting in your reality, when you invoke your understanding of living in life because you've invoked your body, that is when you actually move differently. The revolution won't be televised. That again, people love a good quote, and Gil Scott Heron was trying to get us to understand, because it has to start with you first. You have to believe you first. It won't be televised externally, because until you internally embody what the hell is going on, anything external is just you performing. It is just you buying into. That is not a revolution, right? That is not a rebellion. That is going to be conformity. That is going to be folks who will become Pluto and Aquarius. Pluto and Aquarius does not always mean revolution and rebellion against an authoritarian rule. It can actually mean folks buying into and conforming to an authoritarian rule, because that is seen as innovative. That is seen as rebelling against what currently is. But if you don't understand what we currently are in, you will be rebelling against something that is having you rebel in the ways it wants you to. It's like every movie we ever see, right, where the villain comes in and they realize that they've been used, right? We actually read this in Ring Shout, right, where the protagonist thinks that they're doing something against the villain, but they actually realize that they're the ones that have been used by the villain because they put them where they want to be. The new She-Ra on Netflix also does this in season 1. I got a little one, and that's actually a good. That's actually a good show, y'all. I think we're in season 4 now. There's 5 seasons. But I've been watching it with my little one when they're here with me. And so, but it's these kind of classic stories, these classic lines of your oppressor needs you to believe that you are pushing back in one way, shape, or form, because that is what allows them to maintain themselves. So the full moon in Taurus right now is revealing and asking us to really sit and grapple with the uncomfortability of the present day, right? The uncomfortability of this is what happens when we play with politics and politics plays back. And if we stop the judgment and just realize that we are sitting in a harsh reality in the US right now, in which we are November 2nd, SNAP benefits will not go out to certain states, right? So now we are going to see in this first week, we have a lot of tensions in the air, because not only is Venus going to be opposing Chiron and then squaring Jupiter, so we are having tensions of our relationships to the self and to our families. We also have Mars opposing Uranus this week as well, right after Venus is in this kind of T square with Jupiter and Chiron as well. So what does this mean? Well, Mars is right now at a late degree Scorpio, about to hit over into Sagittarius, and it's opposing Uranus at 0 degrees Gemini, who's going to make his way back into Taurus. So we're having this teeter-totter at critical degrees, 29 degrees, the end of something. It's an urgency. There is a need to do something, but there can be reactions to it, opposing the planet of literal chaos, of change, of unpredictability, of something new having to happen. Retrograding, forcing us to come back into the Taurus parts of ourselves, into the land, into the food systems, into our infrastructure, right? This is money. There is and Mars going into Sagittarius, there is going to be a conflict. There is going to be a disruption to our philosophies and to our understandings of our money, our food systems, and how we engage with it, and our responsibility that we're now all going to have to face about either having to get clear about what it is we do need, and or understanding that the kind of infrastructures that we are in right now don't really work. So then what does it mean to care for each other? What does it mean to love each other, to love ourselves and one another? This truly is about love, y'all. It really is about love. And I say that because Venus, again, is in this conversation. And Venus will be making her way out of Libra as the full moon continues to be full and then makes its way into Gemini. Venus will then go in from Libra at a critical degree, will then make its way into Scorpio. Now, as Venus does that, she's going to be squaring Pluto. So, what does all this mean? Venus is going into the sign that we're told she does not like being in, just like she doesn't like being in Aries, she doesn't like being in Scorpio. And that's because it's the opposite, it's in the opposite sign of where she does like to be in, Taurus. Venus in Scorpio is somebody that understands illusions, understands glamour, understands the ways that we can't just necessarily go straight forward. What are the receipts you're collecting? Do you understand what it is the other person truly wants and desires, and can you work with it? Could it be manipulative energy? Sure. But manipulation is not always bad when you understand who and what you are manipulating and for what purpose. This is about queering. When signs are in their detriment, when signs are in the opposite signs that they actually like to be in, I want you to think about it as a queering of that sign, a queering of that planet, right? A clearing of that planet in that sign. And with Venus and Scorpio, we're being asked to work with our sensuality a little bit differently, a little bit more, especially because Mars was there hanging out for a while, asking us to strategize, right? With our obsessions, with our desires. So, what are we obsessed with and why? And how do we work with that obsession? And that's something that, again, I've really been thinking a lot about because there's a lot of obsessive things in society right now, but we're obsessed about the wrong things, right? We're obsessed about being right. There's an obsession with trying to do the next thing perfectly, right? We're obsessed with being perceived a certain way so that we don't step outside the lines. Well, at the same time, people want a revolution and want something different, yet don't want to bring difference to the table. Our obsessions really show us just how aligned we are with a society, with a state, with an authority that does or does not like us. Because if our obsessions do not allow us to actually get more curious about ourselves, to grapple with some parts of ourselves, the quote unquote shadows, to understand that the shadow is another part of ourselves, the duality of the self. If we can't grapple with that, if we're too afraid to face our own kind of shadows, our own kind of things that make us have to question the foundations of what we know to true, then how the hell can we really have a revolution about what is? Because we're too afraid to face our own sense of selves. The full moon illuminates things in the dark because the dark is what needs to be faced in order for us to find new light. Something I've been thinking a lot about with this week was, again, this idea of love and where I learned love, right? Where we all learn love from off the bat. And that's the family. Again, we're going back to the family and going back to how we've been nurtured, how we've been cared for. And my Chiron is in Taurus, actually. So Chiron is a generational planet as well. And so if you are born between a certain years, then you'll have Chiron and Taurus. I forgot to look it up, but you're going to do early 80s for sure. We'll have Chiron and Taurus. And so this is a wounding of the self. This is a wounding of the self in terms of being able to feed the self. So where is Chiron and Aries that we're all facing a transit right now of having to face the ways that our bodies themselves have been wounded, how we've not been able to kind of own our own heads, how we've had to face the ways that our identities, right, have been given to us. And so what does it mean for us to reclaim that back? That's why I talk about identity breaking and how we're having to face identity breaking because Chiron and Aries in this transit, but also those who have Chiron and Aries, especially if you're between the ages of 48 and 52, you've gone through your Chiron return because Chiron returns around 50. That is when you really have to face the kind of biggest wounding that happened to you when you were younger, that now you can face and transmute into a source of healing. And so for Chiron and Taurus folks, we're having to face our relationship to food, to feeding ourselves, to our sense of value, how we understand our value. And the ways that for many of us, because of how our identities have been put upon our bodies, so this Chiron and Aries that came before us, in the ways that identity was used as a marker to kind of box us in. Right now, we're having to face the ways those identities then have impacted our understandings of our own sense of value, our own sense of worth, and how that then translates into our relationship to food, to money, to infrastructure, to safety and security. And it's really interesting too, because depending upon your age, we're also then the Pluto and Libra generation. So our Venus, the way that what Venus rules for us generationally, right, is our understandings of power relations and relationships overall, and the institution of relationships. So this is why a lot of us have gone through things like divorces, have different types of understandings of family, queerness, and all of that. Very Pluto and Libra, death and destruction, death and rebirth, right, of Libra things, justice as well, and the ways that our generation has gone through and seen um, various ways of relationships in the law. And we've gone through both having rights given to us and now taken away, an imbalance of things, and how that has impacted our understandings of our value and worth, Chiron and Taurus. This kind of transit right now of Taurus with Uranus that is upending things, and the full moon, and how we're having to face the kind of instability of supposed structures that we thought were stable that could feed us all, is really going to have us also rethink relationships, y'all, and how we engage with them, how we pragmatically understand what love is, what care is, and the necessities on the ground of what is needed for our bodies to sustain ourselves. Because love is cute when we talk about it in these kind of, ephemeral, unconditional love ways that we have been fed, right? We have been fed over the years, especially in media with movies about love and heteronormative love. And, it's all gooey, and you fall in, somebody goes on a trip and it's around Christmas time and they end up in a small town with a man who's got a flannel on, and the woman leaves her job in the big city to like be a trad wife. You know what I'm saying? Like, we've literally been fed this shit over and over again. Hallmark was doing its job, right? In getting us to glamorize these kind of naive understandings of love. And maybe that's one way to do it. But the practicality is, right, what does love mean now? And what is required and needed for us to be able to feed ourselves, to care for ourselves, to understand what safety and security is? We're getting a preview of what we will all need to be kind of having to have healing and wounding of. And it's going to be, again, these most fixed parts of our charts. In the most fixed parts of society, it is food. It is value, it's money, it's how we do exchange, it's how we understand exchange, how we understand our relationships, and how relationships and exchange are in a conversation all the time. Last week, I talked about this, and I'm going to keep harping on it. This is why, for me, relationships really do matter. And this idea of separating business and pleasure doesn't make any sense now, because in that separation, that is how we learn to dehumanize ourselves and one another on the ground. That is how capitalism makes sure that its spirit and its essence of extraction embeds itself on the ground, in the ground, at the same time that it is the ground that is also being used and extracted from. This is what, we talk about with Gramsci. And, again, we love these theories. But what does that shit mean in practice? You will always end up reproducing part of the oppression that you are fighting against if you are not clear about fully what the oppressor is and how it shows up in all of us. We digest this shit. And so, with the full moon in Taurus now, giving its preview, Uranus had to bulldoze, right? Uranus did its job for 8 years. It had to show us the reality that, yeah, we can talk about capitalism and it not being as sustainable. We are seeing just how unsustainable capitalism right now is and how violent it is. Right, we are in this retrograde back in. We are going to have to face some harsh realities that when you play politics, politics will play back. Fuck the judgment and the blaming at this point. That man is in office and he is doing exactly what he said he is going to do. He is going to ensure that we hurt. So, what does it look like then to push back? While at the same time understanding that pushback requires us to still take care of ourselves. We can't push back how they want us to. They want us to push back with the fight. They want us to react. They want us to get individualistic. They want us to believe that these stories that we have been fed in these movies, like The Purge, right? Like The Walking Dead, all of these very dystopian type of understandings of an inevitable future that is only inevitable if we give it permission to be inevitable. They need us to believe that, right? Because that benefits them. It benefits the authoritarian rule. It benefits them buying into their future planning and making. And we can see their imagination is not very imaginative, right? It's not very imaginative. It's exactly what their forefathers did. Go and take everything and then make yourself kind of the one that is seen as the enlightened one, or the one that is giving us, a way forward. If we believe our realities, again, if we allow the structures to reveal themselves, if we allow the most fixed part of our charts to break, Uranus going back through, to break open so that we can break free, right? Understand that the breaking and that the change is needed for us to then reclaim it. So then how do we then reclaim value? How do we understand value and worth? How do we understand our relationship to money and to resources that is filtered through an understanding of love? If we understand love to be action, love to be fire, love to be the foundations of how we understand our relationships to ourselves. So what does self-love look like? So I do believe that this week is really about self-love, the love of the self that allows us then to figure out what it means to love one another. And then that allows us to figure out what we're fighting for. Remember, Venus is going from Libra, the sign of the scales, of balance, of justice, into Scorpio, the sign of the strategist. What do we learn and how do we strategize through love so that we believe our oppressor, right? Mars going into Sag now. Mars is now going into the sign of philosophy, of belief. What are the strategies that we are using, and how do we understand our belief systems now that we have been embodied? Mars going through Scorpio these past few weeks with Mercury hanging out, because Mercury and Mars are still in a kind of loose conversation, right? What are we strategizing around, and how do we strategize with love at the center, but love not in a naive way, love in a queer way, love in a primordial way, love in the old mother's way that understands that you got to believe who the hell you are going up against, and not in a performance of that so that you are still performing how they have taught you to fight back against. You are understanding and embodied in that. And then that is how you are then moving forward. Now, this is why I say this, y'all. So, yesterday, I went to this Chicago Film Symposium out in Hyde Park that was funded by, I think, U of C. And it was because one of my good friends, Moya, she had a documentary that was being filmed there. It was 8 people, 8 films that were selected. And her documentary, You Just Watch and See, was one of them that was being filmed. And so, we were sitting there. I was with my friend, and we were watching. And I'm biased, but also she's brilliant. Moya's documentary was amazing. It was a short, kind of short story of her cousin Dottie, who has now passed. She passed earlier this year, but she was able to record Dottie's story. And this is for Moya's overall project, Misogynoir in Medicine. And so she's collecting Black women's stories of their relationship to medicine. And Dottie was a nurse, an older woman, probably around my mom's age. My mom's 80 now, so maybe a little bit older. But she's a nurse, and she was talking about some of her stories having to engage with the medical system. And one of the stories was of her on a trip with family, in which when she was driving, her arm just kind of gave out, and she ended up crashing into a guardrail. And in this moment of crashing into a guardrail on the side of a mountain out west, not understanding why her arm went limp, she deduces, because again she's an RN at this time, she had LPN, was training for her RN. She deduces that something is wrong with her spinal cord, and that she needs immediate care. And so she literally tells the folks in the car to call the ambulance or flag somebody down. An ambulance comes, and as the ambulance is there, she is literally telling them that they have to lay her flat, that her if not that they're gonna her spinal cord will be severed, and she's essentially giving them step-by-step instructions of how to care for herself. And then when she gets to the hospital, she is telling them, and she's in Alabama. Oh no, actually, she's not on the East Coast. Sorry, she's in Alabama. She's down south. Excuse me, she's down south. And so she goes to the hospital and she's telling the doctor, and I need an X-ray, and she explains what she knows to be true about her body. They do the X-ray, and the doctor's like, "Oh shit, you're right. How do you know this?" And she explains, "I'm a nurse that was trained in Chicago and X, Y, and Z." And so then they have to move her. And so one part of the short, she says something to the effect of, somebody asked if they wanted her to hold if they wanted them to hold her hand while she's going through this procedure, and she says, I can hold my own hand, right, as a way for her to make it very clear that she knows that she has to save her own life. And as I was watching this, y'all, it got me thinking about my mom. Like, it was a crazy reaction, because I realized that I was crying, and I couldn't stop, like, the tears just forming, in the sides of my eyes. And I was like, God damn, what is going on? Because it has been a long day. It was the last documentary. It was the best. um because some were interesting. But it was really moving. And afterwards, when we were talking, Moya Forrest and I, about it, I told Moya, I said, it was interesting because Dottie's story is my mother's. It's like, if I was talking to my mom, I would have you talk to her too. Um, because Dottie is an older Black woman who was a nurse, um, living in a time, who lived through Jim Crow right south before she moved up to Chicago, went back and forth from Alabama to Chicago, like a lot of Black folks did, and who live in the city, who lived in Detroit as well, up in the Midwest, right? Who went into medicine. That was my mother's story. The How many times my mother has had to literally save her own life. And that's how I learned, right? That's how I learned to be able to advocate for myself. That's how I had to literally save my own back when I realized that I had slipped a disc and pinched my L4 nerve. I couldn't walk. I fell down in the streets of Ireland when I was 20. Literally couldn't walk one day, and I knew exactly what happened. I was like, I got a pinched nerve. I just wasn't sure if it was going to be full damage or not. And I learned all of that from listening to her grow up. She was giving her nursing degree when I was a kid. And Chiron and Taurus, food was always an issue growing up. I grew up on food stamps, old school booklet food stamps, in which you literally did have that government block cheese, and I had that powdered milk, that big ass white box of powdered milk with the blue writing on it, and that spout. Fucking powdered milk. But that cheese made some good ass grilled cheese. I'm not gonna lie. And we get that big ass thick Texas toast. So my mama would put a slice of cheese on top, and then she broil it. That's when I knew underneath the stove that very bottom thing was a broiler, because she actually used it. All this shit, right? So I grew up always having to think about food, always being very aware of food being scarce, and that my mother was going to nursing school, and she was in beauty school, very Teresian things, very body, right? Trying to make more money, because my dad was older, and he had actually been forced retired when you had that 80s boom of tech coming in. So again, this new tech kind of era that we're in with AI is not new. We see these things over and over again in the market, and especially in capitalism, how we always get fed this best new innovative thing that requires humans to then be expendable. So my dad was part of the 80s layoffs because he was older and he wasn't trained in computers, because computers was coming in. And Wall Street was kind of getting modernized and all that shit. And he was an accountant. So long story short, I grew up in a house, being the eldest daughter, right? Of always having to be very aware of food, being very aware of money, and all those kind of things. And so my mom, I'm the oldest of how many of us are there? There's like seven of us, but there's three have passed. And so my mom is harsh. My mom is harsh. She only understands love through harshness because that is how she was taught love. And so, but there's a harshness was needed because she is still a Southern Black woman who has a bit of an accent, right? Who is a bit rough around the edges, who literally lost all of her teeth. That's a whole nother story. That's a whole nother story, right? So she, like, but who's also really intelligent. But because of the body she occupied, people never saw her that way. And so growing up, there was a way that, she was having a stroke one time and literally told them, I'm having a stroke. And they didn't believe her. They said that they literally told my mom that she was having dementia and that she was crazy. And she was like, no, I'm having a stroke. And then I get there, all of my siblings get there. I get there. I was in town I just moved back. And it's obvious to me she's having a stroke, and I have a PhD, not in medicine, but like you ain't gotta have a fucking medical degree to see a person having a stroke. And I had seen actually my dad when I was 17, no 15, when I was no 16. When I was 16, I was also the one that found my dad in the house having a stroke, right? There's a lot of shit with me and family members either stroking out or dying in my house that I was growing up. So I also had been experienced this. And then my siblings, being nurses, they were like, no, she doesn't have dementia. Like this woman is this one thing Rosie Truesdale is not is out of her mind. That woman knows exactly who the fuck she is and what's going on. So this is not normal. She is sick. So, long story short, with that, because I have been trained by my mom and my siblings, I told the doctor, I need you to write down in this report right now that you are releasing her because you are saying that this is dementia and not an actual neurological or physical ailment. And because he was laughing at us, like he literally was laughing at us, like it was the most disgusting fucking thing. But that hospital is also the same hospital that my dad died in. So we also knew not to trust that space. It's Advocate off of Kedzie out in Hazel Crest is an awful place to go, and it's known for that. So again, you have to believe the space you are in, y'all. Believe your fucking oppressor. In that moment, the oppressor was the goddamn medical system, right? I knew that, period, point blank. And so we got that discharge because we needed to put it on paper that they were discharging her, saying it was dementia. My sister was working at another hospital out right before the city limits in Oak Lawn that was a stroke hospital. So she happened literally to be on call or on duty that day. So we called her. She made sure that they knew we were coming. They get my mom in. They put her on the machine. She's having a fucking stroke. She knew it. We knew it. We all knew it. She had to save her own life. Right. And so when I was watching Dottie's, when I was watching the documentary, You Just Watch and See, that was about Dottie, Moya's cousin, and having her in a very humorous way, she was a character, right? Talk about how she had to literally tell these doctors that her had a severed spinal cord. And this was really severe. So she had to literally have one of those head guards on for 2 years. They had to drill into her head and put that head guard on. And she thought she was going to be in Alabama for 2 weeks, and she was down there for 2 years recovering. Right. So it's a stark kind of story and reminder of what it means to occupy certain bodies in these societies, right? Of how we've been taught love, how we have to express love will be different based upon how we've been able to even receive it, to hold it, to have our bodies even be recognized. And so then I thought about my mom, right? I thought about how I really do understand why there is ways that this is the best way she can show me and my siblings love, right? She doesn't know how to do it other than to save her own life. And part of saving her own life is showing care for others, right? That she can't give to us. And it doesn't make any logical sense. I'm not even trying to make it logical. I'm not even trying to necessarily give it an excuse. It's more about an understanding, right? And watching that documentary was a way in reflecting back and understanding that I've lived that life. I've lived the daughter of that life. And I mean, no disrespect when I say that. I could tell that Dottie probably wasn't the best mom to her own kids because she was probably a damn good nurse. And the two things sometimes don't go hand in hand, because how can they? Because when you give all of this care to others, how do you have enough for even yourself, let alone those in your own household, especially when your body is read as a site of reproduction and labor in a racial capitalist society. You see what I'm saying, y'all? Like all of these planes are colliding. So full moon in Taurus is illuminating, right, the ways that Uranus in Taurus for the last 7 years has had to break and upend the most fixed parts of all of our charts and also society, the foundations of the economic systems, the foundations that have allowed us to feed ourselves or not feed ourselves are based upon an extractive system of the body of safety and security that has been bastardized, that has been fed back to us in ways that do not actually feed us, but require us to give more and more, so that even our value and worth is tied to the service that we can provide to others that we do not even know how to give to ourselves, or the ones that we have given birth to that we are part of these family structures in. The illumination of this in this full moon in Taurus, right, is really asking us to get deep, get clear, get confident in what do we mean by love? What do we mean by love? Because it is a foundation. You know, I get that's how my mother can love, but it is not loving of me. And so there is a break there, right? The relationship is broken. And there's a grieving there, something that I've had to grieve. Chiron, Venus, Jupiter, right? I'm feeling that. I feel that in all kinds of ways. And again, it's not just me. I know plenty of us are having to grapple and face the relationships that we've been a part of, our understandings of justice, our understandings of care. You know, we talk about people pleasing all the time with Libra, but we're taught to please others over ourselves. That is something we are all groomed into. You know, something I told my mom before, we stopped talking. We had a really frank conversation because she was so confused about why my siblings would do certain things. Like they were always giving their shit away to others. She would always bitch about, them lending money out or helping other folks before they helped her and all this other stuff. And I looked at her and I said, it's because we learned that from you. Like, and she just looked at me. She's like, "What do you mean, Nikki?" I said, "Mom, we learned that from you. All we saw growing up is you putting other people first, you feeding whole departments. Yeah, they may have paid you, but like you were cooking for Taurus again, food. You'd be cooking for 3 days. We couldn't eat any of it. We're hungry, but that wasn't for us, it was for them. You know, we would sit here and watch as, you would pay. I said, you paid for my brother's friends to get their CNA license because their parents kicked them out. You gave them a place to stay. Like there was no room in the house. They were doubling up downstairs. You paid for their schooling along with my brothers. Like we saw, like you put other people before this house. You put other people before us. We understood love through sacrifice because and also you would tell us about how, don't let nobody kind of run over you. But you also at the same time taught us and showed us that other people become before us. So that's via work. So if work called, whether we needed the money or not, they always got first. So I said, so what makes you think that then we wouldn't do that? That's probably the only conversation we really had that was honest, and truthful without kind of blowing up at each other. And she was just like, "Oh, Nikki, I never thought about that. You're right." And I really did realize she never thought about it like that. She truly hadn't. And it didn't necessarily make anything feel better, honestly, but it was at least truthful. Like, I think I had to tell myself that that's how I learned love. So I want you to ask yourselves that, y'all, how did you learn love? How did you learn love? And how was it shown to you? And if we can get honest about that, it allows us then to make different choices. Again, if I only understood love through service, through giving, that really is helping me understand why I overgive in everything I do when it comes to work. Because I can be a workaholic. I was just talking to my roomie and friend Forrest about this, right? About how I'm trying to make sure that I don't constantly give too much over and over, because that is how I've been taught to be of value and service, is to show, right? To prove that I'm worthy or valuable enough. It doesn't matter how many degrees or how much my experience is or whatever it is. It's always this underlying anxiety of having to prove and show value. Well, then shit, if I understand where that came from, well, that makes sense. Right. And again, All of us can talk about this because all of us have been groomed in one way, shape, or form to understand our sense of self and value coming through how we can perform and show it, because that is what capitalism needs us to do. That is a racial capitalist system. That is the embedded nature of it in society, right? And it's embedded in, and we are groomed through it in these institutions, and the first institution being the family. What the fuck do we mean by all of these things? Right? You can't just say it to be true and not expect there not to be a action that is required of you, required of us, right? And I think that's what we're also having to realize. We call these words down and we call these dead down. People are invoking Zora's name, shitting on her legacy while also invoking Hoodoo Heritage Month. You wouldn't have half these stories if it wasn't for that woman taking that white woman's money, cussing them men out in public and also behind doors, being ostracized because she was a woman who dared to cuss these fools out, right? To then have another Black woman years later, when she died destitute, resurrect her name. For you to sit your ass on a fucking app right now talking about how that woman would vote for fucking Trump when you are the embodiment of exactly what Trump needs to maintain his ass right now. We don't believe our oppressors, y'all, because that's not what love is. But that is what love is in an extractive system. You extract from the dead. You take what you want. You sit here and you say that that is what community is. This is what, the right way to do something, but you don't do it, right? You tell other people what to do, but then you say you can't do it because you're neurodivergent or you don't have the capacity, right? Or whatever other kind of excuse you can make for you to make yourself the exception and make yourself special. Zora talked about this too, how specialness gets you to be complacent and docile while thinking revolutionary, because who told you were special? Who defined that for you? How was love defined for you? And if love is defined through you being right, through you having a moral superiority, right, through you feeling as if you can just kind of talk about it but not be about it. Mars in Sag, after coming through Scorpio, opposing Uranus, is going to say, well, then put your money where your mouth is. What is the action behind your beliefs? Because shit is going to change. We're in the midst of change right now, and the state is going to continue to do exactly what it says it does. So then what are you going to do? Where is love? How do you enact love? So when we start to love ourselves a little bit differently, because we understand what we actually need, right? We need sustenance. Food is required for us, and we need to eat clean food, good food. We need to feed one another, right? And we also, guess what, got to feed our dead. If even the dead got to eat, if even the dead got to eat, y'all, if even the dead got to eat, what the hell are we feeding them and us? And how do we show love when the foundation of even where we put what we would put our dead, right, we don't take care of? We can't conjure these energies in if we don't actually realize they require an action. And right now, love has been conjured in all kinds of ways. Justice has been conjured in all kinds of ways. People have called in Venus. Venus is a warrior. Venus is a warrior. It's not just Mars. Venus will go to war for what she loves, because that is what love is. Love is understanding that this is needed. This is the foundations of justice, of relationships, of economic systems, of society, of our culture. This is culture. If culture teaches us what love is, and the culture we are in is rooted in an extractive racial capitalist system, right? Well, Uranus had to go through and break up our relationship to a system that taught us love by valuing ourselves only by what we can do and show to others. Is that what love is? Because then how do you get it back? Reciprocity. Where is the reciprocal relationship? Where's the transaction? Where's the contract? Taurus, illuminated, the full moon in Taurus. What are the contracts of your life? And are they equitable? Because Venus will still be in Libra at that end, and it's going to be in a conversation with Chiron and with Jupiter, expanding, right? Expanding our understanding of the kind of love that we need by the kind of structures of family, of nurturing, of care, of our relationship to who we come from, right? And how that has been impacted through our sense of selves. How a self, do we own our own heads? And if we own our own heads, then we can own and take responsibility and reshape who our families are, the relationships we're in, and how we engage in these economic systems, in these relationships. So think about the story of love. Think about where you learned love from. And ask yourself, is that the story you want to continue? And if not, then what is the new story you want to tell? How can we learn from our elders, right? Learn from them. And sometimes is learning not to do what the hell they did. That's what you learn. I learned a lot about how to be a decent boss by learning and seeing what my former bosses did not do, right? That taught me what not to do as well, right? You don't bring somebody on and not onboard them and then get mad when they don't know what the hell's going on. That doesn't work for me. So that way, when I was hiring on new folks, onboarding became a really big part of my practice because of not getting it. Same idea, right? If I realize that I don't like love in an extractive way, if my way of understanding love keeps me in a space in which I then do not love on myself because I disrespect myself because I know I'm a workaholic. I know I'm a workaholic. I know I will push and fight through, right? That's why I gave birth and didn't have any goddamn pain pills. And I would never do that shit again. I would never do that again. But when your pain level is so high, because you've been taught to put other people before you. And that's what love is. Therefore, that's what makes you a good person. But then your body is finite. Your body will revolt back. Full moon in Taurus, your body will be talking to you, especially with the South Node still in Virgo. That stomach is alive. That intuition is loud. Do you know what your body is saying? That's why when y'all work with me, you know this. I ask those 3 questions about checking in with the body and doing it over and over again and putting it to a song so that you can understand and learn what the body is saying to you, your other mind, right? That stomach is your other mind. Well, this illumination of Taurus is going to be telling you that that other mind can only talk to you when it's fed, right? That other mind has to be fed. If the dead's got to be fed, your body's got to be fed. Then your head also is fed. We feed our heads. We feed our ovaries as well. Everything requires feeding, y'all. That is love. That is love. Everything requires feeding. That's the offering. Right? So how have we been taught love? How have I been taught exchange? How have I been taught service and care? That's the big lesson for this week. Okay. So work with those stories. Ask yourself what those stories really entail. And as Venus goes further into Scorpio, we're going to be talking more about the strategies that we can deploy, about how we really can start to queer our understandings of the kind of depths that we go and how we work with Venetian energy as a location to resist, to push back, how we work with culture, y'all. And that's a powerful tool. That's another side to the warrior Venus themselves. It's not just Mars. And Mars was in Cancer. Remember when Mars was in Cancer last year and did that retrograding? It was a long transit because Mars needed us to face our own understandings of what we need for care, of how the family was going to be a site of strategy, how we were going to have to reevaluate our understanding and relationship to our emotions. Mars in Cancer, my natal placement. Yeah, people talk about us being passive aggressive. Fuck that. I'm going to ask you how you goddamn feeling, and I really do mean it because your emotions really do matter. They tell me more about you versus what you trying to perform and tell me what you think I want to know, right? The feelings, the empathy. Being empathetic is truly a gift. It's truly a spiritual gift that all of us have access to, but it is not one that you're just supposed to just give out nilly-willy. That doesn't make any sense. That is not strategic. That is naive. And naivete has a purpose, but then until it doesn't. So where do we need to not be naive? Where do we need to face the darkness, right? To go through illuminated, what is being illuminated for you. Look to that again, that Taurus house for you and ask yourself, then where am I having to find and redefine love? What's the redefinition of love? What's that story if you bring in that Tauresian house? Okay. All right, y'all. I'm gonna get myself off here. I told myself not to do too much, and I've already done more than I wanted. Not a bad thing. I enjoy talking with y'all. So we're gonna continue this conversation, okay, about Venus. In 2 weeks. We're gonna have the new moon in Scorpio, and by that time, Mercury is gonna be retrograded. We've got Mars hanging out in Sag. So we're gonna continue this conversation because, again, this is a personal conversation about our relationship to the self, to understandings of care and love, right? And then at the same time, we're going to have Uranus further into Taurus and Neptune further into Pisces. So I want to have a more in-depth conversation next week about these outer planet retrogrades and what that means for us, right? As we are going to further into this in the Northern Hemisphere, the winter time. Okay. All right, y'all. And as always, for if you want to do the Astrology 100 series with me, check out the show notes. That will be through Big Liz Conjure. I will be running a special with that, so you can take the classes individually, or you can take all three for a reduced price. And that will be up on the website with Liz. And also, if to book a one-on-one with me, go ahead and check out my website as well. All right, y'all. And as always, keep dreaming, keep exploring, because it's through the dreamscapes that we can say we can bring the futures we want to bring into the present. All right. Till next time. One hand to heaven, the other pointed straight to hell. Right hand as strong as the left, dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance with them and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where the dead reside. You gotta use both hands and feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demon masquerading as human.
Wandering, scratch that wandering, trying to find a meaning to it all. Morning's coming, but I ain't running. I'm just dancing with the shadows on the wall. To get to heaven, I went through hell, and now I see it all for what it is. Battling demons to fight for freedom, but surrender is the only way to win. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark. Shadow dancing, playing with the light in the dark.
Justice for the dead, life for the living. What is key is we need to sing a song of freedom from tyranny. One hand to heaven, the other conjuring the dead, who know the songs and actions of freedom that are needed for us in the times ahead.
Clear the rage, refine the age, and everybody's hiding from the truth. Stuck together for all alone, and haunted by the shadows in the room. But that's tomorrow's and yesterdays, racing to leave something behind.
trunk of a tree, strong, sturdy, weather-bearing. Offerings laid, prayers are made. Now, for the summoning. Dance with the shadows, songs erupting as lips and hips move to the drumming. One hand to heaven, the other on the other side. Justice for the living requires justice for those on the other side. Pointed straight to hell. Right hand as strong as the left. Dancing in the shadows with myself and the dead. The shadows on the walls, a mirror to the self. Why stay stagnant and allow the flames to consume you? Dance with them and conjure under the new moon. One hand to heaven, the other a guide to the other side where I dead reside. Hear the ancestors call out. You gotta use both hands and feel your feet if you wanna defeat the demons masquerading as humans. Cause we've been here before. Time a loop of remembering and forgetting to remember once again. Of times before those shadows of former selves. One hand to heaven, the other to the past. That brought a present, a shell of the self. One hand to heaven, call down your head and dance in the light of self-knowing. The other hand extends down to the land, a remembrance, a signal to awaken the dead and rise up in glory. Hallelujah! Say their names and watch the shadows dance among the flames. Righteous justice, Libra, fully balanced.